You physically feel it, don't you? Not exactly like a desperate, fleeting hope that you frantically try to hold on to, but exactly like a heavy, undeniable certainty that lives somewhere deep inside your chest, long before your rational mind has any time to intervene. This specific person deeply, profoundly cares about you in a way that is entirely, undeniably real, in a heavy way that you have perfectly perceived exactly at specific quiet moments, in deep glances that violently lasted just 1 microsecond too long, in a particular, beautiful way that they entirely had to be different, specifically with you, than they are with absolutely everyone else. In this incredibly rare capacity of unique, heavy presence, they flawlessly displayed exactly when you were together. And yet, there is a massive, suffocating but. There is absolutely always this heavy but. Something dark is violently preventing it. Something completely stops them exactly at the precise moment when you would logically expect them to finally move forward. Something is violently holding them back exactly before the specific word that would have beautifully changed absolutely everything. Just exactly before the heavy gesture that would have finally said something entirely decisive. Just exactly before the terrifying moment when the massive love you deeply feel could have finally, beautifully existed in the open air entirely between you two. Perhaps their heavy door violently closes at the exact, precise moment where something beautiful between you becomes entirely too real. Perhaps they frantically change the subject to create a slight, safe distance. Perhaps they deliberately transform a beautiful moment of deep intimacy into something incredibly more neutral, much more secure, and infinitely less demanding for their fragile nervous system. Maybe you clearly see them actively doing that, and you absolutely do not understand it. Maybe you have painfully told yourself 100 times in the dark that if they truly, deeply loved you, they absolutely would not do that to you. Today, I am going to completely pull back the curtain and show you exactly what is truly happening, not to cheaply excuse exactly what violently hurts you, but so that you finally, brutally understand with a massive precision that you perhaps have absolutely not yet grasped exactly what is violently happening deep inside them, and exactly what it profoundly says about the two of you. Carl Jung, one of the most profound and fearless explorers of the human soul that the world has ever known, had a massive, terrifying understanding of this exact specific phenomenon, this crippling inability to physically show a love that is, however, profoundly and undeniably real, which belongs entirely only to him. A dark understanding that says something incredibly true, entirely about exactly the specific way in which the most deep, loving hearts violently destroy love. They completely block its exit. The massive psychological concept that Jung would have placed exactly at the beating heart of absolutely everything that you are painfully living through right now is called the shadow. And entirely in a single, heavy sentence, that is exactly what this is. The shadow is absolutely everything that a human being has violently repressed, brutally denied, or heavily protected entirely from themselves. Absolutely everything that was violently hurt and frantically sheltered, completely blocking access entirely to certain beautiful parts of their emotional life. Absolutely even when the person desperately, starvingly would like to access them. This is absolutely not a cheap character flaw. This is absolutely not a toxic lack of true love. It is a massive, bleeding psychological wound that has absolutely not yet healed. Jung was heavily observing something incredibly profound, that ordinary, surface-level psychology absolutely does not ever know how to say clearly. He deeply observed that the pure capacity to physically show love and the deep ability to internally feel love are two completely, entirely distinct things. He discovered that someone can violently experience an attachment that is incredibly deep, entirely sincere, and totally real, while being simultaneously completely unable to find the physical path to the outside world. Not absolutely out of toxic ill will, not entirely out of cheap, cruel manipulation, but exactly because something massive in their fragile psyche is violently blocked exactly where you desperately need it to absolutely not be blocked. This massive blockage has a deep origin. It has a cold, terrifying logic. And this specific logic, exactly when you finally understand it, completely changes entirely the exact way you receive absolutely everything that happens between you two. Someone who has absolutely never ever been brutally hurt in love has absolutely no logical reason to violently block the beautiful expression of this love. The massive blockage only violently appears exactly where something incredibly painful happened in their past, where physically showing exactly what they feel has violently cost them something entirely too big, where raw vulnerability was brutally punished in one way or another, whether entirely through sudden abandonment, through cruel mockery, through massive betrayal, through devastating loss, or simply by a prolonged, agonizing absence of a warm response to exactly what had been beautifully given. And the human psyche, which is ultimately a ruthless survival machine, violently draws permanent conclusions entirely from its traumatic experiments. Terrifying conclusions exactly like, if I ever show exactly what I really feel, something incredibly bad risks happening. Or, to be totally vulnerable is incredibly dangerous. Or, the massive love I offer will absolutely not be safely received exactly in the way I desperately need it to be. These massive conclusions are absolutely not conscious. They are absolutely not clearly formulated as logical thoughts. They are violently buried deep in the shadow, in this dark part of the psyche that Jung described as the massive totality of absolutely everything we decided to completely stop showing the world. And from exactly down there, they violently operate totally automatically, precisely with a cold, terrifying efficiency that has absolutely nothing to do entirely with the conscious, logical will of the person. And this is exactly what is violently happening deep inside them, exactly at the precise moment where something beautiful between you becomes entirely too real. The dark shadow actively awakens. The massive alarm signal is violently triggered, and the cold protective mechanism, entirely equally useless as it is exactly in this specific safe situation with you, violently does exactly what it has absolutely always done. It violently closes. It entirely retreats. It completely neutralizes. Absolutely not because they don't deeply love you, but precisely because the massive love they heavily feel for you is incredibly big enough to violently activate the ancient protection system that had been specifically designed to completely protect exactly this massive level of terrifying vulnerability. You powerfully awaken something incredibly deep within them, deep enough exactly for the dark shadow to violently react. And this massive reaction, incredibly painful as it is for you to live with entirely on your end, is paradoxically the absolute proof that something incredibly essential beautifully exists completely between you two. And somewhere deep inside your own gut, you absolutely already knew this. Not precisely with these clinical words, not entirely with this exact precision, but your deep soul knew that this heavy blockage was absolutely not cold indifference. Something ancient inside you knew that entirely behind this sudden retreat, entirely behind this violent closure, there absolutely was something incredibly warm and entirely real that was frantically looking for a safe passage and simply could not find it yet. You knew that, and you heavily carried that heavy certainty entirely in absolute silence, completely, without ever having the exact words to defend yourself exactly when the brutal pain tried desperately to convince you of the exact opposite. If you are recognizing this painful psychological loop right now, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We cover these concepts every day, diving deep into the dark psychology of human connection, and you absolutely will not want to miss the tools coming in the next breakdown. Herein lies the absolute central paradox of everything that I will tell you today. Just one heavy sentence. It is absolutely not the lack of deep love that violently prevents someone from physically showing it. It is entirely the terrifying excess of exactly what that love brutally cost them in the past. Let this massive sentence exist exactly for one heavy moment, because it completely overturns absolutely everything that blinding pain makes you falsely believe exactly when someone you deeply love violently fails to physically show you exactly what they heavily feel. The cold logic of your suffering angrily says, if they really deeply loved you, they would absolutely find the means. If it really truly mattered to them, they would actively make the effort. If the feelings were truly there, they would absolutely have a way. Jung would have clearly stated that this cold logic completely disregards something entirely essential. It absolutely does not take into account exactly what massive, untreated injuries violently contribute to the shattered capacity for emotional expression. It absolutely does not take into account that the physical path entirely between internally feeling something and externally showing it might be violently blocked by something that has absolutely nothing to do completely with the reality of their pure feelings for you. The massive problem absolutely isn't the love. It entirely lies in exactly what love has already brutally cost them. It is violently trapped in the psychic memory of exactly what catastrophically happened the very last time something of such profound, beautiful significance was bravely offered. They exist in a tragic state of unconscious, heavy certainty, absolutely irrational but entirely, violently real to them. The certainty that going entirely back again, becoming entirely too vulnerable, carries the massive risk of violently producing something entirely unbearable again. And that massive, terrifying certainty absolutely does not peacefully dissolve entirely, by a conscious, logical decision. It absolutely does not dissolve. Simply because you are beautifully different. Simply because you are incredibly kind. Simply because you absolutely would not do exactly what has been brutally done to them. The deep unconscious absolutely makes no such fine distinction. It only clearly sees the massive level of pure vulnerability requested, and it violently activates the corresponding protection protocol, entirely regardless of the high quality of the beautiful person standing opposite them. This massive paradox absolutely doesn't magically tell you that the painful situation will be easily resolved in a precise, neat way. It heavily tells you something incredibly true, completely, about exactly why they are exactly like that, and truly, deeply understanding the why completely changes something profound entirely in the specific way you can safely be with that reality. Let me now precisely describe the exact phases of this toxic cycle that you have heavily experienced, and exactly what is violently happening deep inside them entirely, in a way that you will absolutely recognize from the inside. The absolute first phase is exactly what I will accurately call the heat that precedes the blockage. This is the exact phase you absolutely know the best entirely, because it is the specific one that violently gives you massive hope. The beautiful moments exactly where something deep between you is incredibly real, totally present, completely living entirely in a specific way that you absolutely cannot safely ignore. These deep conversations where something massive passes between you, their lingering glances, their particular warm way of being with you that loudly says something completely without spoken words. In this exact phase, you deeply feel something that is incredibly true, and you are entirely right to safely feel it, because it is completely true. It is absolutely not your desperate imagination. That's absolutely not exactly what you desperately want to see. It is something massive that beautifully exists really on their side. And it is physically showing up exactly in those precise moments, exactly when the dark shadow is absolutely not yet activated. Exactly where something beautiful and spontaneous naturally emerges entirely before the violent system of protection has any time to react. These beautiful moments are entirely real. Keep them safe. They loudly tell you something entirely essential about exactly what exists completely between you, entirely under the chaotic surface of what is incredibly difficult. The massive second phase is exactly what I would accurately call the alarm threshold. This is the exact, precise moment, exactly when something violently changes. Exactly where you can almost physically see the heavy closure beginning to slowly install itself, or something dark in their eyes, or a shift in their bodily language, or in their sudden, completely different way of holding the physical space that loudly says exactly that something massive has just been violently activated. This exact moment incredibly often has a specific trigger. Sometimes it was exactly you who said or did something that violently touched something deep within them. Absolutely, not necessarily something negative. Sometimes it's exactly something incredibly beautiful that violently triggered the massive alarm. A beautiful moment of deep intimacy that was entirely too real. A single word entirely too true. A warm gesture entirely too close. exactly to something they absolutely do not yet allow themselves to fully receive. And exactly in that precise moment, you clearly see them violently change. And you frantically look inward for exactly what you did wrong. And you absolutely cannot find anything, entirely because you have absolutely done nothing wrong. You simply, beautifully existed exactly in a way that violently touched on something entirely too deep, entirely too fast, exactly for the dark shadow to safely let it pass completely without reacting. The agonizing third phase is exactly what I will accurately call the closure and the void, which follows. This is absolutely the most brutally painful. They completely close themselves off. They violently put up the massive distance. They rapidly become entirely less available, entirely less themselves, entirely less present completely, in a way that you heavily feel entirely in your body long before you can logically formulate it exactly in your head. And exactly in this agonizing phase, you violently stay exactly with the brutal contrast entirely between exactly what you had heavily felt just moments before and exactly what is freezing cold there now. And this massive contrast is particularly excruciatingly difficult to physically maintain entirely because it absolutely does not give you any clarity. It absolutely does not tell you it is completely over or it is entirely possible. It violently leaves you trapped in a heavily suspended, agonizing space entirely between the intense heat that you absolutely know you physically felt and the freezing distance you're actively living in right now. And exactly in this suspended space, massive, terrifying doubts can quickly install themselves. Maybe you heavily misread the entire situation. Perhaps the intense heat wasn't absolutely exactly what you desperately thought it was. Perhaps you're frantically projecting. No, you absolutely did not misread a single thing. The deep unconscious of this person simply violently took over the entire control, exactly at the precise location, exactly where something beautifully real was desperately trying to fully exist. The exhausting fourth phase is exactly what I would accurately call the cycle and its gradual exhaustion. Because this massive toxic pattern violently repeats itself endlessly. Intense heat, the alarm threshold, violent closure, crushing emptiness, and then the intense heat again, and you endlessly go back to them entirely, because exactly what beautifully exists, when it exists, is sufficiently incredibly real exactly, so that you go back, and they endlessly come back to you entirely, because the dark shadow can violently block the physical expression, but it absolutely does not destroy the deep attachment. And the toxic cycle violently begins again. And exactly at some point, something massive completely runs out. Absolutely not necessarily the deep love, but the physical capacity to safely maintain this agonizing cycle indefinitely, completely, without absolutely anything ever being truly resolved. But here is exactly what Jung would add to this massive equation. And this is exactly the heavy part that most fragile people violently avoid entirely, because it completely returns their own gaze heavily towards themselves, entirely during all this time, exactly when you were obsessively looking entirely towards them. During all this agonizing back and forth, exactly when you were frantically trying to fully understand exactly what was violently blocking them, exactly what was actively maintaining them entirely in this toxic cycle. because that is exactly something Jung would have brutally said entirely with a terrifying clarity that absolutely leaves absolutely no room for time to safely dodge. You absolutely cannot cross someone else's dark shadow entirely in their place. You absolutely cannot forcefully make them ready completely faster than they truly are. You absolutely cannot violently unlock something that entirely belongs completely to their own internal psychological process. Exactly what you absolutely can deeply do is bravely look at your own massive share. Is there absolutely something exactly in your specific way of existing, exactly in this toxic relationship, that heavily keeps you completely in a painful position of waiting that feels incredibly familiar to your nervous system? Is the agonizing act of deeply loving someone who absolutely cannot quite tell you or show you incredibly similar exactly to something you have known for a very long time? Something massive that entirely precedes this specific relationship? Is there absolutely some kind of dark, hidden belief entirely within you that falsely says true love absolutely asks to be desperately deserved completely against the violent resistance of the other person? These heavy, brutal questions are absolutely not designed to cruelly blame you. They are completely there to beautifully help you clearly see your own dark shadow, the exact one that can sometimes violently carry you entirely towards highly particular, toxic dynamics. Absolutely not because you secretly deserve the brutal pain, but exactly because something incredibly familiar entirely in these toxic dynamics perfectly resonates exactly with something incredibly older entirely within you, and bravely seeing that, truly, brutally seeing it, is exactly the beautiful beginning of something massive. Absolutely not the tragic end of exactly what you deeply feel for them, but the beautiful beginning of completely, in a much more highly conscious way, beautifully holding on entirely to exactly what you feel. The brutal pain of this massive situation is incredibly real. The heavy feeling you deeply have completely about exactly what they truly feel is entirely real. Those beautiful, warm moments you deeply experienced entirely with them were completely real. That absolutely doesn't magically erase entirely, because the violent closure is incredibly painful. But here is exactly what you absolutely deserve. You beautifully deserve someone who absolutely finds the physical path completely to you. Someone whose dark shadow, entirely with time and massive inner work, beautifully opens entirely enough to safely let through exactly what is already here. You beautifully deserve a massive love that can safely, beautifully exist completely in the open air. Absolutely, not only exactly in the heavily protected, tiny areas entirely between two violent closures. Is this specific person completely capable entirely of this massive path? That is a truly real, brutally honest, and entirely necessary question. Absolutely not a cheap accusation, but a profound question. Because some incredibly rare people, entirely with the right safe space and massive time, beautifully pass completely through exactly what violently blocks them, and others tragically remain completely in their dark shadow entirely for as long as you can absolutely reasonably wait. Absolutely, only you can beautifully decide exactly how long you can safely stay entirely in this toxic cycle, completely with total integrity and completely without violently losing yourself. Exactly what you deeply feel for them is incredibly precious. Exactly what they deeply feel for you, if you read it entirely correctly, is incredibly precious also. But the immense value of exactly what beautifully exists completely between you absolutely does not magically justify violently putting your own entire life entirely on hold indefinitely. You can beautifully love someone and completely recognize entirely that this deep love absolutely cannot, at this exact moment, beautifully take the specific physical form you absolutely need. These two massive, heavy truths can beautifully coexist entirely without one violently invalidating the other. And whatever exactly is the ultimate direction it completely takes, you will absolutely come out of this entirely different, with a massive, profound understanding of yourself that you absolutely did not have before, with absolute, blinding clarity completely on exactly what you beautifully deserve, a clarity that the brutal pain of this massive situation beautifully gave you. Absolutely. Even if it wasn't exactly what you were desperately hoping to safely receive. Something deep inside you has known completely since the very beginning entirely that this massive relationship is beautifully teaching you something entirely essential. Absolutely not just on them, but completely on you too. About exactly what you are deeply looking for entirely in love, and about exactly how you beautifully want to experience it. Listen to this. This is the absolute most important, incredibly precious information that you can possibly receive entirely from absolutely everything you violently go through. A love that absolutely cannot yet be physically shown is absolutely no less entirely real. But a love that absolutely never, ever finds its physical path completely to you is absolutely not yet the love that you beautifully deserve to safely receive. If this deep dive into the psychology of unexpected connection finally helped you understand what is happening in your life, please click the video right over here on the screen. It perfectly covers exactly how to navigate the overwhelming intensity of an activated connection without losing yourself in the process, and it is beautifully designed to give you exactly what you need to hear next. Trust your reality, stay incredibly authentic, and keep moving forward.